Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And it's my pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be asked to speak on this auspicious occasion of the 20th anniversary of IPTAB. So thank you very much. I want to direct my talk. First of all, I apologize. I'm speaking in English as I don't know Korean very well. But I wanted to focus my talk on what I think will be one of the more important intellectual property topics in the fourth industrial revolution, and particularly around artificial intelligence. But first, to start there, you may recognize that college dropout in the corner, a very young Bill Gates who started Microsoft back in 1976. And what I have listed here is a letter that he drafted to a software club about the importance of being able to protect intellectual property. At the time, software was really at its infancy, but he recognized at that time that without adequate protections around the intellectual property being created, particularly around software, it was very easy to copy and to duplicate, and therefore not be adequately rewarded for the efforts put in. And so I iterate that story in this letter a bit to indicate a little bit about Microsoft's history and Microsoft's culture. It's always had an intellectual property aspect to it. Many of you may not know, but Bill Gates' father, Bill Gates Sr., was a patent attorney. And so he kind of grew up with that culture of intellectual property. And today that continues with our strategy, 40 years later. We continue to build a world-class international portfolio. We seek licenses as a licensor. We respect other as IP and to receive a lot of inbound licensing, as well as working with patent offices around the world in policy matters, trying to generate and try to create a healthy IP environment. A little bit about the portfolio itself. Microsoft spends over $13 billion a year in research and development. We have lots of license agreements in place and many, many partners over a large period of time. I believe we've spent over $7 billion in inbound patent licensing over the last 10 years. So again, the importance of respecting one another's intellectual property is something that's very important to us. And we file all over the world. We file primarily in the United States as a first instance, and then file a number of patents around the world, and we continue to do so, on the order of over 2,000 to 3,000 new patents filed in the US every year, and then a corresponding number of international patents. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're seeing starting to happen in the space of artificial intelligence. And so first, I think it helps a bit to be on the same page as to what do we mean by artificial intelligence, because I feel every year that's gone by in the last 4 or 5 years, the definition is getting broader and incorporating more and more things, many things that have been around for a long time. So by artificial intelligence, we mean a set of technologies, and by technologies I mean things like deep learning, machine learning, neural networks, search, reasoning, and issues like that enable machine intelligence to simulate or augment elements of human thinking. And by human thinking, that means the basic senses: vision, speech, language, knowledge, and problem solving. And this is happening at a very rapid pace today. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, made a recognition in a book that he published recently in terms of what is driving that growth in artificial intelligence today. And it really is this confluence of 3 large things: big data, computing power has become faster, and storage has become cheaper, and the algorithms that generate this are more and more sophisticated. And the confluence of those is creating a much more data than what's ever been seen before. A zettabyte, if it's a term you haven't heard, a zettabyte is a 1 followed by 21 zeros. So from 2013 to 2020, the world will grow from 4.4 to 44 zettabytes of data, an astounding amount of data that is being created. Over 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 3 years, in enormous amounts that we continue to generate. And where's this happening? Where's this coming from? was really coming from all around us. And just as an example of this, here's a Ford GT vehicle that has more than 50 sensors and 28 microprocessors in it and generates 300 megabytes of data per second. That's a lot of data to keep track of, and we're seeing more and more of that, not just in the auto industry, but in other places. This is what a data center looks like. This is one in my home state of near Seattle, Washington, in Othello, Washington. It's a large building, many hundreds of yards in length, that contains lots and lots of data storage and computing power. And when you look around the world, combined, Microsoft's cloud is based on Azure. We have 50 Azure regions. Google has an additional 36 Azure regions. And then Amazon has an additional 32 Azure regions. Just amongst the three companies and ourselves, we have over 100 data centers, such as the one that I pictured in Othello, Washington, that is storing and processing all of this data, all of this large amount of compute that is being generated. The infrastructure spending, and as you can see there, is growing tremendously year after year. We're seeing double-digit growth in all of these different areas, which is only going to cause more data centers and more computing power. So that's the first piece. The second piece is availability of modern tools and AI algorithms. And between vision and knowledge and language, and speech and text, these are areas that scientists have been working on for decades. And there's finally confluencing. The algorithms are fast enough, are refined enough, and the processes are fast enough to allow all of these technologies to work in tandem to really start creating artificial intelligence. So what does this mean for intellectual property? And even though this is primarily a patent office, I'm going to talk a little bit about copyright to begin with, because I think there's some interesting issues around copyright that I'll just touch on, as well as some issues around patent. So first, let me just show you this picture of a street in London. An artistic expression, if you will. Two buses, one newer, one older, and a building in the background, and a pedestrian in the walkway. And this has been protected by copyright for many years without really any issues around it. Now, transferring that into an autonomous vehicle or any type of AI-assisted vehicle driving, and you can see that the sensors in the vehicle are able to detect all of these sorts of objects that are along the road, and it's quite necessary for it to facilitate autonomous driving. So now, let's look at that same picture, and is it a work of authorship? Is it an artistic expression, or is it data that can be used more freely in an AI type of system? So again, if you look at this photo, not from the artistic point of view, but rather from the data point of view, you'll see buses on a road, a statue, a stop sign, a person, a traffic light. Those are things that are necessary components from a data perspective to use in an AI system as in an automobile. So there's a copyright question. Is it used as a work, and therefore the author is entitled to protection, or is it used as data? And that data can be used for the various AI systems. So this is being struggled with in the courts today. And in the United States, after it came up first in the context of books, the US landed on the side of, this is data. It's not really being used in its artistic expression in an artistic way, and therefore companies should be free to use that data that's generated from those sorts of images. On the other hand, Europe landed in the other direction. This is not, as long as the work is a commercial work and not used for any non-commercial type of purpose, then the authors of those pictures ought to be compensated as such. So today we have this sort of, at least in the US and Europe, different approaches associated with the same set of facts. Changing this over to patents. So what are some of the technologies that underline AI? Well, it is certainly technical by nature. It is technical in the application. It's certainly innovative. There are complex algorithms that are underlying AI. And it is concrete, real-world applicability, and fast and accurate solutions. However, they are certainly more algorithmic. And of course, at least in the United States, patenting pure algorithms is not allowed. New uses of old algorithms may be obvious. Training data, on the other hand, may be more protectable. And we often run into this issue in terms of trying to protect artificial intelligence types of applications, that if you protect the algorithm in itself and how it's being used, it is not often detectable. And therefore, the patent that you apply for may actually be worthless. However, the output of that may be something completely different. So let's just really simplify AI for a moment. You start with data. There's a lot of data, such as that picture. Data is typically not patentable. There's lots of privacy issues around that data, as we're certainly current in the news today with the issues around Facebook. Whether copyright protection is available on the underlying data and how narrow that protection is rather questionable. And whether it's trade secret or not sort of goes back to that privacy question. So then that data is being used to train the AI algorithms. So there's some levels of cleaning and some level of modifications that's allowed there. So certainly that can be patentable. However, it's probably not detectable, and therefore the patent that you apply for may not actually be worth anything. Very questionable as to whether the training data is copyrightable, and one has a choice as to whether or not one can seek trade secret protection for that type of training data. So that data that's been trained then goes fed into an AI algorithm. Now the algorithm, is that patentable? Well, probably not if it's purely a mathematical algorithm. Is it detectable? Probably not. It's buried in the digital inside of a device. Is it copyrightable? Yes, it is, but very narrow protection associated specific to that algorithm. And is it trade secret protectable? Yes, most likely it is protected by trade secret. Now, an AI system works very well once that is fed back as new data. The AI algorithms feeds that back. So the data and the training, is it patentable? Probably. Is it detectable? Probably not. And therefore, again, you run into the issue of applying for patents that you actually can't use. It probably is copyrightable, and whether it's trade secret protection or not is a choice. Then there's the output itself, the output of the AI. Is that patentable? Probably not. The output itself may be very simplistic and often runs into subject matter patentability 101 issues in the United States. It is likely to be detectable, which is ideal, but if it's not patentable and it is detectable, you run into a problem. Is it copyrightable? Again, probably not, because the output is often a very simple thing that now an AI engine is doing versus a human before. And it's not trade secret protectable because the output itself is publicly discernible. So there is a question that, is there a gap? Is there a gap in protection? Is there no adequate remedy amongst patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and copyrights to adequately protect AI? You could argue that there is a level of gap today, certainly with the amount of time and effort that's being put into AI engines, and is there an adequate way of protecting it? This is a snapshot today of deep learning applications, not just Microsoft, but all companies all over the world. And you can see that the growing number of applications that just used in deep learning has increased substantially. So more and more companies are filing in this area. And again, I ask the question as to whether or not it's actually detectable. So some final thoughts. AI technology is growing because of the ubiquity of the cloud and all of the resources that are not available. Copying works, whether it's used as a work or whether it's used as data. Would argue that copyright should be able to use that as not infringement, but rather as pure data. And patent protection is currently quite limited in terms of what you would be able to do in terms of the patents you'd obtain. With respect to the PTAB itself, I will say, I think it's really interesting. There was, Chief Judge Rushke and I discussed briefly this morning, there were two cases that came down by the US Supreme Court today around the PTAB. And I think the forum is going to become more and more important as the IP tab and the PTABs in various countries will often be the first forum to determine whether or not the subject matter underlying it is patentable or is not patentable. And as we go forward and AI takes an increased level of importance, the IP tab will be in a unique position of having to opine first on some of these issues of first impressions. Thank you very much.
미키 민하스님의 소중한 말씀 감사합니다. 귀에 쏙쏙 들어